Hi everyone, my name's Eleanor and I'm the Education Manager at Benjamin Franklin House. Welcome to this special digital event, Bones in the Basement, to celebrate the Festival of Archaeology, which is going on at the moment and it's going to keep going on up until the 1st of August. So if you're interested in finding more events linked to the festival, then head to the Festival of Archaeology website and there's lots of exciting things you can get involved in. We are so delighted to be welcoming Dana Goodman Brown today. Dana is an archaeological conservator, and I'm going to start by, hey Dana, I'm going to start by telling you a bit of the history of Benjamin Franklin House and how our site links to archaeology. And then I'm going to be handing over to Dana, and she's going to tell you about the work that she does and even share some of the artifacts she's been looking at recently under her microscope with us. So very exciting. And as we go through, if you have any questions, do feel free to put those in the chat, or you can press the raise hand button and we can hear you over the audio. So probably a lot of you have joined some of our online events before, but here's a little reminder of who we are and what our link with archaeology is. So Benjamin Franklin House is the building you can see on the left of the screen. This is on Craven Street in London. And it's where Benjamin Franklin, who you can see on the right of the screen, lived for about 16 years in the 18th century. And Benjamin Franklin is remembered for lots of things. He was a printer and writer, a scientist and inventor, a politician and diplomat, and maybe most famously one of the founding fathers of the United States of America. And he lived here for about 16 years. It was a lodging house at the time, so that meant he just rented this first floor, and he lived there with a landlady who was called Margaret Stevenson and her daughter Polly as well. He was mainly in London because he was representing America in the years running up to the War of Independence between America and Britain. And after he left in 1775, the house remained a lodging house for a number of years. Then in the Victorian period, it became a hotel. And then when we got to the Second World War in the 20th century, that's when it became offices for a period. And then by the end of the century, it was empty. It was becoming kind of derelict. And so there was a charity called the Friends of Benjamin Franklin House, which formed and were able to raise the funds to kind of save the house and do lots of work on it so that we could open as a museum in 2006. Now, there was lots of work that needed to be done, and when some of this work was happening, the builders uncovered something rather unexpected in the basement. So you can just about see the basement below these railings here in the picture, and that was rather a lot of bones. So we now call this collection the Craven Street Bones, and in what's now the basement, but in Franklin's time would have been the garden, they uncovered over 1,200 pieces of bone. And we still have a few of these on display at Benjamin Franklin House, including this skull and jawbone and this part of the femur bone that was found as well. Now, when this happens, when builders uncover artifacts or bones, pieces of history, they need to call on archaeologists to help them so that the artifacts and bones don't get damaged and they can take them out very carefully. They do something called an excavation. You might have heard that word before. So someone has asked, did anyone suspect that Benjamin Franklin was a murderer? I'm sure there might have been a few rumors, but this is where the archaeologists come in. They examine the artifacts and then figure out what it tells us about history. So I'll tell you what they found out about them. So here we have some images of that process. So the archaeologists at work, you can see them working very carefully in the pit using special tools, the bones that were found in the pit, and then afterwards they're having to record everything that they found and kind of store them very carefully. They might then take them to the lab to do more kind of observations with them, and then kind of interpret what the bones or whatever the artifacts are tell us about history. So these archaeologists you can see in the pictures, they came to us from UCL, the University College London, and so actually a lot of the bones they uncovered are in their collection, but we have some still at Benjamin Franklin House. So what history did these bones tell us about? They uncovered another really interesting aspect of the house's history, which is our link to medical history. So remember I said that Benjamin Franklin lived here with the landlady and her daughter? Well, her daughter was called Polly Stevenson, but then later became Polly Hewson. And there's a painting of her here on the left. And she later became Polly Hewson because she married this man in the middle of the screen, William Hewson. And he was an anatomist. So that's a special type of scientist that really studies the body, both human and other animals. And because a lot of those bones that were uncovered had traces of scalpel marks and saw marks, the archaeologists could interpret that they were linked to this anatomy work that William Hewson was doing at the house. And so in the garden, he was running an anatomy school where medical students would come and practice surgical techniques and things. And so that's the story of how the bones came to be buried in the basement of the house. And this gentleman on the right of the screen, that's William Hunter. So the Hunter brothers were really famous anatomists in the 18th century. There's a great museum, the Hunterian Museum, that has a lot more artifacts from the time they were being anatomists. And they actually trained William Hewson. So he used to work with the Hunter brothers, William and his brother, but then he came to Craven Street and started his own anatomy school. So that's the story of the Craven Street bones and the reason that we needed to have archaeologists come to Benjamin Franklin House to uncover them. Do let me know if you have any more questions, but we can come back to those at the end, because for now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Dana.
Thank you, Eleanor, and hello, everybody. It's really nice to be here as part of the festival. And so I'm going to share my screen and start with some slides. I have a PowerPoint talk that I put together a little bit. So I'm focusing mainly on objects, actually, metal objects today. I do work also with bones occasionally alongside specialists but I'm part of a team in archaeology. We all have our different little bits of the puzzle and to put together. And so my bit is more about material science and the objects that are in graves or found on excavations. But sometimes I do work with the bones if the objects are in a grave and the bones are close to the objects, or they need special help. They're very fragile to get them out of the ground. And in fact, this week on Wednesday, I was down in Folkestone at doing a very special work with Saint Eanswythe, who is England's earliest saint surviving, and she'd been hidden in the walls of the church and found in the Victorian period. And we recently did some work with osteoarchaeologists doing DNA and radiocarbon dating, and found out that she really is, she's been thought of to be St. Eanswythe, and that she has the right date, and it is a woman. And so I was looking at her femur and skull bits and seeing how it will fit into a new reliquary we're going to have done. But in my own studio at home, where I thought I was going to be inviting you today, but had some internet cable problems, so I've moved my lab into a little display room in my kitchen right now. So I'm sorry that we're not in the lab, but I brought my microscope over and I'm going to talk about archaeological objects. Now, you may first think as a conservator, you might think about the before and after picture. And that is kind of a big wow part of my job that I love very much. And receiving something that you can't tell what it is, and then you take an x-ray and see that there's something pretty exciting there. And so here's my wowie before and after. Oh, let me go to the slideshow too. And so that's my before and after picture. So yes, I get to be joyfully seeing things half cleaned and fully cleaned before and after, which is really wonderful. But there's a lot of other aspects to my work, and that's what I'm going to focus on a bit more today, rather than the before and after things. But this is an Anglo-Saxon Mount that was found on the sides of the sword, a little pyramid mount, and it's silver with gilding on it, and it's got niello, which is a silver copper sulfide that makes it like a black enamel. And that highlights that the Anglo-Saxons loved their not clashing, but sort of clashing and dynamic color systems and symmetry. And this is a garnet in the middle with, and underneath, can you see the little crisscrosses there? It's patterned so that it would sparkle. So that's the kind of thing that I look for the details and the little things, everything that we can find out about the object to help tell stories. I also do the basic thing like helping curators in museums look after their finds and archaeologists when they've come out of the ground. This is a Anglo-Saxon spearhead that wasn't kept in a dry enough condition after it was cleaned. And it's why a lot of museums have to spend a lot of time and effort into thinking about creating microenvironments to store the materials so that they last into the future. So that lasted 1,500 years to come out of the ground, and then now it's losing a lot of its surface. We have now stabilized that and kept it in a dry situation, so it's doing okay now. And also helping in storage. These things were dug up in the Victorian period. They're Anglo-Saxon, and we went into the museum and studied them and looked at them and repackaged them so that they again can last better in the museum. And it's much better to put them into packaging like this rather than wrapping them all up in tissue, which you think you're doing a good job, but actually that can damage it when you take it in and out. So that's another part of my work as an archaeological conservator, is giving advice on how to care for objects and examining them. This is a Chinese archaeological bronze in a museum in Compton Verney in Warwickshire. And so I throw a lot of scientific techniques to understand objects better. This is ultraviolet light will pick up old restorations. So the yellow line along here, that's fluorescing, and that's fluorescing because there's adhesive there. So even though the object looks solid, under X-radiography or ultraviolet examination, we know actually it's been restored in the past. And then other things like this staining here, that's stickers. So we're often advising on how not to not to put stickers onto objects because it can cause problems. I'm on sorry, my family's just arrived from, my niece has just arrived from America. It's kind of interesting with the Benjamin Franklin link here, but so I'm in the kitchen doing my Zoom. So stickers is something we'll say. Sometimes being a conservator, you have to be a bit nannyish and be saying like, handle with gloves or keep it dry, keep the silica gel and don't put stickers on it. But this is a good example of why we, the things we look out for. Now getting back to archaeological things, in my town where I live in Kent, they found a big Anglo-Saxon cemetery, and this is like most all the work I'm involved in at the moment, or these days, and for most of my 40-year career, has been called developer-led conservation. So like at Benjamin Franklin House, they were doing conservation work on the house, and they came across the bones in the process. That is the basis of all my work, really. It's because if a new house is going up, or they're doing renovation work, or this is, in this case, a whole housing estate and shops, ahead of that work, archaeologists will work alongside the development of it and do investigations to see what's there. And if you find something really important, then we try to, do as much work as we can to understand it better. So in this case, there was 229 graves found, and this is the archaeologists lifting what we call block lifting, and that's putting some plaster around a sword to make it strong enough so that you can lift it out of the ground and it won't fall into pieces. And sometimes I go along and help myself with block lifting like that too, which is an exciting part of my job. Here's the plan of this excavation. And we decided, it was in my hometown, so kind of the idea occurred to do an exhibition in the shopping mall and involve the local community in preserving it. We've so far done half the cemetery, and we're fundraising to try to do the second half. We'll see, fingers crossed we can get back to it. And this is the way we worked. Well, we dealt with one grave at a time. Ideally, one conservator would be working on a grave at a time, and we examine the x-rays of the objects. We do mechanical cleaning with a scalpel. We do sometimes mechanical cleaning with something called an air abrasion, which is micro blasting, but always under a microscope. And so each grave is like a time capsule. So in our cases in Sittingbourne, it was too acidic. We didn't have the bones surviving. We only have the metal. And so you work from the metal to try to work out where the bones were. And then by and working together and looking at all the micro details and the evidence, we can find evidence of the wood on the shields and things like that. And so that's part of the process of being an archaeological conservator. It's not just about cleaning it and seeing how beautiful it is. It's figuring out how it was made, how it was maybe used, and how why was it put in a grave along with what other objects. And this is a little quick illustration of how we use an X-ray. So an X-ray is to guide us with well, first of all, what is the object we're dealing with it? And is this something important enough for us to clean, or can we identify it from the X-ray alone, or because it's very time consuming to clean? So, but it also shows us the condition it's in. And so like here, it's lighter weight. This is the core of the metal, but it's a spearhead. So it's surviving and their surface isn't too bad. But I know that like wherever it's got darker areas, it's like if you've ever seen an X-ray of a broken bone, where you've got dark lines is the break. It's more hollow from where it was on the shaft. So that's what I'm always referencing my work to the X-rays when I'm working on an object. And then under the microscope, I'm looking for things like patterns, organic materials that are that don't survive over time. They degrade, but sometimes I say corroding, I'm talking about like we'll go orange products. Now these metal ions will go into the organic materials sometimes and fossilize it against the metal. And under the microscope, we can see things that are part of a wasp or bee, and this is the wing. So insect parts. This is a little bit of an Anglo-Saxon brooch, well, what was leaning against a brooch. And there's a bit of woven textile here, but we don't know, like, is that vegetable fiber or animal fiber? So I take it to my favorite microscope, which is a scanning electron microscope. And that because you're in a vacuum and it's detecting electrons bouncing off, special bit of scientific kit. You get these beautiful weave of the textile and higher magnifications. You can see details of individual fibers, and that's telling me it's a linen flax. It's a vegetable fiber. It's not an animal fiber. I'll show you a picture of an animal fiber coming up. And then we also have evidence like the reason I call the project CSI is that a lot of the work we do as conservators is like the forensic scientists and the CSI, if anyone watches that on television or knows about police work. So instead of crime scene investigation, we're conservation science investigation. And we find things like beetles that have gone into, and part of the, and fly pupa, I think I've got a fly pupa next. The Anglo-Saxons had their bodies out for about 5 days, we think, and part of the way we know that is through the insect, this kind of data of finding insects and knowing the time that it takes to pupate and all. And people were dressed in their fine clothes, and then maybe part of the ceremony for greeting that loved one community member would be coming and saying goodbye and recognizing their clothes and their items that were put in the grave. So we see textile. This is a textile cut in sections, so it's like a belt, double layered belt. There's the warp, and there's the weft, if any of you weave. And here we go, talking about that animal versus that's vegetable. And animals' skin, hair has scales on it, and they're also different sizes. So these are, this is in this section of the warp here, and you've got, and the weft there, and the warp here. And these lines here are the scales. And the fact that they're different sizes of fibers is something that helps us know what it is. And this we weren't sure if it was insect or vegetable, or like wings of a moth or something, or some kind of plant. And then we worked out it's part of a feather. And so, and it was found near the head. So perhaps there was a feather pillow. And this is a quick series of things that I found just looking in one little hoop. It's part of a belt that women wore, and their keys and cosmetic tools and things would hang off of it. And this was block lifted. And so I've x-rayed everything in situ, so you can see kind of the relationship between the different pieces. And if you'd imagine if you'd excavated them out one by one, you wouldn't really understand it so well as a belt, I think. So this is a bit of the fiber that was found that was part of the clothing. This is just corrosion, but it's rather fantastical. So things that you see. So that was corrosion, not telling us much of anything other than it was corroding. This is a bit of fly pupa. Again, this is all fossilized. It's not the actual thing. Here's a bit of an insect leaf, a bit of an insect part. Here's I think that might be a bit of moss. It's a leaf, anyways. There's still not a vegetable fiber, but I'm not sure we can tell what that is. There's that leaf again. And then the reason I think it's moss is because my favorite find ever, it's a bit of a mascot now, is I thought this was an insect, and someone pointed out to me it's probably it seemed to be a tardigrade. And tardigrades look like this, and they're also called moss bears. And they eat moss. So it's telling us, aside from being just really cool, they're a millimeter long, it being cool little creatures to find. They don't die, they curl up and go dry, and they've been shot into space by the Russians, and they're studied because they survive radiation. They're being studied today to help with cancer treatments and things. So but in terms of the archaeological story on our site, it's telling us, because they eat moss, that there was moss either in the bag that she was wearing or with stuffing in the grave. We need to see if we can find a bit more of it to know between the two. But I love it's looking for these little details that then kind of tell us more about the story. And this is, again, looking at, so when I see things under the scanning electron microscope, I then either go to a specialist to confirm what things are, but I also look for things, Google the images and see, and that's like a little claw of a tardigrade. So these are the little 4 claws, and then the skin behind. So that's why I'm pretty sure that is a tardigrade. I'm also carrying on with research looking at things called phytoliths and molds and moss and pollen and resin. This is from a Roman I'm thinking it's a lacquer on a box. So we start with our grave with the objects inside and not a lot of information, and by the work in the conservation lab we end up starting to really fill out the story of what's in a grave. And this is one little shot of bones I have. This is, the pot's fallen away from it, but it was a cremation urn from a Roman cemetery in Folkestone. And so you can see the bones are all in here. But sometimes there's objects inside as well. So we x-rayed the lump of soil, which has held its shape of the pot. And then occasionally I do experimental work. And so I threw that in to see, that's kind of another aspect some of us conservators get involved with. Experimenting with things like how pigments are made, and so that we understand a bit better when we're actually looking at the objects, and then do little workshops with people. So that's a run through of what I wanted to do as an introduction. And then so now it's moving about a bit. But what I have here, I'm going to take you back in time. This is my most recent object in the lab at the moment. It's from a 18th century cesspit in Oxford. And they sent it to me to clean. I don't know if I hold it up first of all to just see, so you can see the size it is. It's 2 coins, and they sent it to me with a batch of coins to clean. And then as I cleaned it, I realized, oh, there's textile there. And so it's coins in a little bag. And so I can look down my microscope here and then see we think it might be crochet. I don't know if there's anyone watching that can recognize that, but it seems to be crochet as opposed to weaving. So it was whether it fell off someone into the cesspit, or whether it was nicked and then the person got caught and they threw it down the cesspit so they wouldn't be put in trouble, go to prison. Somehow it ended up in a cesspit. And so we're just starting to kind of do more work on it. And I'm waiting for cement to arrive to reinforce the floor for a new fancy bit of equipment called a CT microscanner. So that Kent University has purchased, and we are going to hopefully read these coins and identify them without me having to dismantle the bag to get them out to clean them. So now, so this is 18th century. And then another thing I have, I'm going to go to the Roman period now. And this is a lovely little coin that I just think is so sweet. If you know the legend of Romulus and Remus, the wolf, and as the founding of Rome. I'm not a historian, so I can get tangled up in when I talk about the details like that, by the way. So because what I focus on is material science, but I do know that story about Romulus and Remus. So I recognized that. On the other side, so can you see the this was covered with corrosion, and I cleaned it and found the two eyes and the nose and the ears of the wolf, and here's one of the twins, and here's the other one. So and then on the other side is, it's harder, it's really hard to see on the other side. We've got a bit of the head of the emperor. This, because it's very hard to read. So I clean them, and then they go on to the numismatist who can date them specifically and say what we're able to know what that is. Now, the other big project I've been working on in the studio all through the whole pandemic period, really. I was quite lucky that we had this lined up before lockdown. We did have to wait quite a long time when the museum shut down at first to bring this out. Now, this is a Bronze Age hoard. So the coin was about 2,000 years old. Now we're at 3,000 years ago in the Bronze Age. This is part of a spearhead. If you want to see it, if you see my little screen, can you see my little screen? Can everybody see that? Yeah. So this is sort of the size of it. And I'm holding it with my hands because I'm in their mid-treatment. So I do wear gloves a lot, but I'm going to be degreasing it and stabilizing it. So it's just easier at the moment to not wear my gloves. These are the tool marks, which I think are quite lovely to see. Again, after casting and sort of hammering it along. And then there's other stuff that's there. So this Bronze Age hoard is the third or fourth, depending on how you measure it by weight or numbers, or whether it's found in one hole versus four. This is all found in one hole. The third or fourth largest hoard in the country. So I think in Europe, or definitely in the UK, in the Bronze Age, and it's found near Maidstone, and so it's at Maidstone Museum, have some of the pieces on display. And there is bronzeagehoards.com or via my website, you can find links to the story of this hoard and all the work we're doing, and how we're a team with researchers studying it more. And I've been fortunate to be tasked with tool marks is one thing I do. This was part of a cauldron or bucket or something, and it's got little studs that hold all the pieces together. So it's like been maybe repaired over time. So that's quite a lovely piece, I think, as a fragment telling us the story of that. Here's another spear. Now these are cleaned. So this is after cleaning, and we can see striations like here. That's from probably the polishing and sharpening of it. And the swords have gone back, but with the swords, there were a lot of nicks on the sides. We were looking at the nicks from possibly sword on sword damage. Whoa, it's really rocking. Sorry. This is a armlet that I've stuck together. So the pieces with these hoards, they're always in fragments, and there's lots of different theories about why. And there's a fabulous exhibition of another hoard that again is vying for the third or fourth place, and that's the Museum of London right now in the Docklands. I think it's still on display till the middle of August. That if you're interested in hoards and why they were buried, head over there. It's a great exhibition. So these little bits, so they're often found in fragments, but these I think were broke maybe in the recovering of it. And this was found by a metal detector, so it was treasure. And then now it's at the Museum of London. So so that's sometimes I'm repairing and putting pieces together again. This is a bit more what it looks like. This is we find evidence in these hoards of the manufacturing process. This is what we call it, were made by casting molten metal into a mold, sometimes in sometimes lost wax, where you make a wax maquette and then burn out and put a mold around it and burn out the wax and then pour your metal in. Or sometimes quite often in a two-piece stone or clay, or even sand mold. Now, when you pour your metal into the mold, you're left with this cup. Now, this can be recycled, but whether it was held together for future recycling or whether, well, we don't know how it ended up in the hoard. But so this is showing you a little bit more of how the surfaces have looked. The others I've shown you, I've already cleaned away the surface for soil. So that's sort of corrosion in soil that's mucking up the surface. And we've been going through the pieces. It's 64 kilos, this mold. This particular hoard. And this is a really lovely thing. This is a knife. So here, and this is one we made doing about last month. We did some experimental casting and copied this and made it as a mold. So this is maybe the color it would have looked like originally. And then this is how it ends up now. I quite like the patinas. I think they're quite beautiful. But yeah, originally they would have been more shiny. So this is a lovely sort of knife. I don't know whether it's a scraper or knife, and it might have been made from a sword fragment. We've been wondering about that. So I think that's what I brought in to show. And if anything, if anyone has any questions, we can go over to questions now, and I can bring back objects or whatever, however you want to do it.
Thanks.
Is that all right?
Thanks so much, Dana. Yeah, wow, that was just so fascinating to hear about what you do and the process, and then to actually see some of these things up close under the microscope. Thank you so much for joining us today. And did anyone have any questions they wanted to ask Dana about the work that she does, about any of the artifacts we've got to look at this afternoon? Do feel free to put anything in the chat, or if you'd like to press the raise hand, we can hear you over the audio.